To our amazing viewers at Cheating Tales Lab, welcome and thank you. Your presence makes these stories worth sharing. We'd love to hear, which part of the world are you joining us from? Let us know. Now, let's dive into today's story. Chapter 1. The Mask of Ordinary. Victor Kane adjusted his hospital gown for the third time that morning, the sterile white fabric feeling foreign against his scarred skin. The oncology ward buzzed with its usual mixture of hope and despair, but Victor's mind was elsewhere, calculating, always calculating. At 42, he had learned that survival required more than just beating cancer. It required understanding every player in the game. Mr. Kane, your treatment is responding well, Dr. Phillips said, reviewing his chart. We should continue with the current protocol. Victor nodded, his steel-gray eyes betraying nothing of the storm brewing beneath. The cancer had been a wake-up call, but not in the way most people experienced it. For Victor, it had sharpened his focus on what truly mattered: loyalty, respect, and the price of betrayal. His wife Diana sat in the corner, scrolling through her phone with barely concealed impatience. She had the kind of beauty that turned heads: auburn hair, emerald eyes, and a figure that belonged in magazines. But Victor had long since learned to see past facades. Diana Kane, née Mitchell, had married him 3 years ago when she believed he was just Victor Kane, a modestly successful consultant with a quiet demeanor and a comfortable savings account. She had no idea who he really was. "Diana, could you get me some coffee?" Victor asked, his voice carrying that particular tone that made most people comply without question. As she left, rolling her eyes at what she perceived as another mundane request, Victor's phone buzzed. A text from his handler: "Package delivered. Target acquired." Victor deleted the message and smiled. The Mitchell family had always been users, and Diana was no exception. She came from a family that believed the world owed them something. Her parents were social climbers who had raised 2 daughters to marry up and marry well. Diana's younger sister Rebecca was getting married next weekend to Troy Harrison, a pharmaceutical sales rep with ambitions that exceeded his abilities. The wedding would be expensive, far beyond what the Mitchell family could afford. Victor had watched them scramble for months, borrowing, begging, and planning a celebration that would bankrupt them. He could have offered to help, but he wanted to see how far they would go, how desperate they would become. Diana returned with coffee that had clearly come from a vending machine. The wedding planner called. She said without preamble, "Rebecca needs another $15,000 for the venue upgrade." "That's unfortunate," Victor replied, taking a sip of the terrible coffee. "I told her we'd cover it." Victor set down the cup carefully. "Did you?" "Come on, Victor. It's my sister's wedding. It's important to her. And my cancer treatment isn't important to you." Diana's face flushed. "That's not what I meant. Can't you just postpone a few sessions? The insurance will cover it eventually." This was the moment Victor had been waiting for, the moment when Diana would reveal her true priorities. He had suspected for months that she was growing tired of playing the supportive wife, tired of hospital visits and medical bills, tired of a husband who wasn't providing the lifestyle she felt entitled to. "No, Diana, I can't postpone cancer." She turned away, frustration radiating from every line of her body. "You used to be different. You used to care about what mattered to me." "I used to be a lot of things," Victor said quietly. What Diana didn't know was that Victor Kane the consultant was a carefully constructed identity. The real Victor Kane had been born Victor Kozlov in a neighborhood where survival meant learning to fight before you learned to read. He had clawed his way out through a combination of intelligence, brutality, and an absolute refusal to forgive weakness in himself or others. At 18, he had enlisted in the military, not out of patriotism but out of necessity. The army had given him structure, discipline, and access to training that most people only saw in movies. Special operations had given him skills that made him valuable to certain government agencies that officially didn't exist. For 15 years, Victor Kozlov had been a ghost, moving through the shadows of international conflicts, eliminating problems that diplomacy couldn't solve. He had accumulated a fortune through careful investments and discreet payments for services rendered. More importantly, he had accumulated a network of connections that spanned from Wall Street to the darkest corners of Eastern Europe. But ghosts couldn't get married. Ghosts couldn't live normal lives. So Victor Kozlov had died in a car accident in Prague, and Victor Kane had been born with a new passport, a new history, and a burning desire to find out what normal felt like. The answer, he was discovering, was that normal felt like betrayal in slow motion. His phone buzzed again. This time it was Diana's sister Rebecca, texting about wedding details. Victor scrolled through the messages, noting the increasing desperation in her tone. The venue wanted payment in full. The caterer was threatening to cancel. The florist had already been replaced twice due to budget constraints. Diana was still turned away, staring out the hospital window at the parking lot below. I sometimes wonder what would have happened if I'd married Bradley instead, she said quietly. Bradley Turner. Victor knew the name well. Diana's college boyfriend, the one who had gotten away. Bradley was everything Victor appeared not to be. Charming, outgoing, socially connected. He worked in pharmaceutical sales alongside Troy, Rebecca's fiancé. In fact, Victor had discovered through his usual channels that Bradley would be in the wedding party. You could have, Victor said simply. Diana turned back to him, surprise flickering across her features. What? You could have married Bradley. But you didn't. You married me. I know, but nothing, Diana. Marriage is a choice you make every day. Loyalty is a choice you make every moment. She studied his face, perhaps hearing something in his voice that she hadn't noticed before. For just an instant, the mask of Victor Kane, the mild-mannered consultant, slipped, and Diana caught a glimpse of something that made her take a step back. Sometimes I feel like I don't know you at all, she whispered. Victor smiled, but it wasn't a warm expression. You don't. The next few days passed in a haze of treatment sessions and wedding preparations. Victor observed his wife's behavior with the detached interest of a predator studying prey. Diana's conversations became increasingly focused on the wedding, on her sister's happiness, on everything except her husband's battle with cancer. She started staying out later, claiming wedding errands. She took phone calls in other rooms. She became protective of her phone, keeping it face down and never leaving it unattended. Victor didn't need to spy on her to know what was happening. He had seen this pattern before, in different contexts and different countries. Diana was reaching out to Bradley Turner, rekindling an old flame under the pretense of wedding coordination. She was building an exit strategy, piece by piece, without realizing that every move she made was being cataloged and filed away. The night before Rebecca's wedding, Victor stood in their bedroom, watching Diana try on 3 different dresses, seeking the perfect look for her sister's big day. She settled on a deep blue number that hugged her curves and complimented her eyes. You look beautiful, Victor said, and meant it. Thank you. Diana smoothed the fabric, avoiding his gaze. Victor, I need to ask you something. Go ahead. Rebecca is really struggling with the honeymoon costs. She and Troy had their hearts set on this resort in Belize, but it's $75,000 for the package they want. Victor waited, letting the silence stretch until Diana was forced to continue. I was thinking, maybe we could help them out. As a wedding gift. $75,000. I know it's a lot, but we have it in savings, and family is important. Diana. Victor's voice cut through her rambling like a blade. Do you know what $75,000 means to someone fighting cancer? Her face flushed. It's not like you're going to die or anything. The doctor said you're responding well. Oh. Victor nodded slowly. So because I'm probably going to live, my medical care becomes optional? That's not what I said. Then what are you saying? Diana's composure cracked slightly. I'm saying that sometimes life is about more than just survival. Sometimes it's about being there for the people who matter. The people who matter, Victor repeated. I see. He walked to the window, looking out at the street below. A black sedan was parked at the corner, just as it had been for the past week. His security detail, keeping watch without Diana's knowledge. Old habits died hard, and Victor Kane might be a fiction, but Victor Kozlov's enemies were very real. I'll consider it, he said finally. Diana brightened, mistaking his words for capitulation. Really? I said I'll consider it. She kissed his cheek, the gesture feeling more like a transaction than affection. Thank you. I know this means a lot to Rebecca. As Diana headed to the bathroom to start her elaborate pre-wedding beauty routine, Victor pulled out a secure phone and sent a single text. Game starts tomorrow. The response came immediately. Copy that. All assets in position. Victor deleted both messages and smiled. Tomorrow, Diana would learn the first rule of Victor Kozlov's world. There was always a price for betrayal, and payment was always collected in full. Chapter 2. The Web Titans. The morning of Rebecca's wedding dawned crisp and clear, The kind of perfect day that wedding planners dreamed about and photographers loved. Victor stood in the mirror adjusting his tie, a classic black silk number that complemented his charcoal gray suit. To anyone watching, he looked like exactly what he claimed to be, a successful consultant attending his sister-in-law's wedding. Diana emerged from the bathroom in her blue dress, her makeup flawless and her auburn hair styled in an elegant updo. She looked radiant, excited in a way that Victor hadn't seen in months, not since before his cancer diagnosis. "You look incredible," he said, and watched her beam at the compliment. "I want everything to be perfect for Rebecca," Diana replied, adjusting her earrings in the mirror. "This is her day." "Of course it is." They drove to St. Gabriel's Cathedral in relative silence, Diana checking her phone periodically and smiling at messages Victor couldn't see. She was texting someone, probably Bradley Turner, but Victor had learned long ago that the most effective traps were the ones the prey walked into willingly. The cathedral was a study in Gothic architecture, all soaring arches and stained glass windows that cast rainbow patterns across the white marble floors. The Mitchell family had clearly stretched their budget to its breaking point for this venue. Victor estimated they were probably $50,000 in debt already, not counting the honeymoon Diana was so determined he should fund. "Victor, Diana." Rebecca rushed over, radiant in her wedding dress. At 28, she was a younger, more innocent version of Diana, the same green eyes and auburn hair, but without the calculating edge that marriage and disappointment had given her older sister. "You look beautiful, Rebecca," Victor said, genuinely meaning it. "Thank you." Rebecca hugged him tightly. "I can't believe it's finally happening. Troy and I have been planning this for 2 years. 2 years of planning that had apparently included very little financial planning," Victor noted, but he kept that observation to himself. Rebecca was guilty of nothing more than being young and naive, qualities that her family had clearly exploited. "Where are my parents?" Diana asked, scanning the growing crowd of guests. "Mom's with the florist having a minor meltdown about the centerpieces, and Dad's outside smoking and trying to pretend he's not stressed about the budget," Rebecca said with a nervous laugh. Victor had met Robert and Linda Mitchell exactly twice, and both encounters had left him with the impression of people who had spent their entire lives trying to maintain appearances they couldn't afford. Robert was a mid-level insurance adjuster who dressed like a CEO, and Linda was a real estate agent in a market where she was perpetually outclassed by younger, hungrier competitors. "I'll go find them," Diana said, leaving Victor alone with Rebecca. "Victor, I need to ask you something," Rebecca said, lowering her voice. "Diana mentioned that you might be willing to help with the honeymoon costs." "Did she?" "I would never normally ask, but Troy and I have been saving for this trip for so long, and with all the wedding expenses." She trailed off, clearly uncomfortable with the conversation. Victor studied her face. Unlike Diana, Rebecca's distress seemed genuine. She wasn't scheming or manipulating. She was simply overwhelmed by circumstances beyond her control. "What does the honeymoon mean to you, Rebecca?" "It's our dream trip. Troy proposed to me on a beach in California, and he promised that someday we'd go somewhere even more beautiful. When we found this resort in Belize, it felt like fate. They have these overwater bungalows, and the packages include everything: scuba diving, helicopter tours, couples massages. It would be the most romantic 2 weeks of our lives. $75,000 for 2 weeks. Rebecca flushed. "I know it's excessive. Mom says we're being ridiculous, that we should just go to Florida like normal people. But Troy works so hard, and we've never had a real vacation together. This would be our once-in-a-lifetime trip." Victor nodded slowly. "And if you can't afford it? Then we'll figure something else out. Troy says we could take out a loan, but I don't want to start our marriage with that kind of debt." She looked around the cathedral, taking in the flowers and decorations that represented months of planning and financial strain. "I just want one perfect thing, you know." "I understand," Victor said, and meant it. What Rebecca didn't understand was that she was being used as leverage in a game she didn't even know was being played. Diana had chosen her sister's honeymoon as the battleground for a much larger conflict, and Rebecca was collateral damage. Victor's phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Target acquired. Secondary subjects in position. He deleted the message and looked up to see Bradley Turner approaching. At 35, Bradley was exactly what Victor had expected: tall, athletic, with the kind of easy confidence that came from never having faced real adversity. His smile was professionally charming, the kind that probably closed pharmaceutical deals and opened bedroom doors with equal effectiveness. Victor Kane, right? Bradley extended his hand. Bradley Turner. I'm in the wedding party with Troy. Victor shook his hand, noting the firm grip and the way Bradley's eyes assessed him like competition. Nice to meet you, Bradley. Diana's mentioned you. Has she? Bradley's smile widened slightly. All good things, I hope. She said you were the one that got away. The comment hit its mark. Bradley's confident facade flickered for just a moment, revealing something hungry underneath. Diana always had a way with words. She did. She does. They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, sizing each other up. To anyone watching, it would look like two men making polite wedding conversation. Victor could see Diana across the cathedral talking to her parents, her body language animated and excited. She kept glancing in their direction. I heard about your health situation, Bradley said carefully. That must be difficult. Cancer is never convenient, Victor replied. But I'm managing. Diana seems to be handling it well. Does she? Bradley studied Victor's face, perhaps hearing something in his tone. She's a strong woman. She is. She's also used to getting what she wants. I remember that about her. Victor turned to face Bradley directly. What exactly do you remember about my wife, Bradley? The question hung in the air between them, loaded with implications that Bradley was clearly trying to decipher. Before he could respond, Diana appeared at Victor's side, slightly breathless and flushed. Bradley, I didn't see you come in. She kissed his cheek, the gesture lasting a fraction too long to be purely platonic. Wouldn't miss Rebecca's big day, Bradley replied, his eyes never leaving Diana's face. Victor watched the interaction with the detached interest of a scientist observing a chemical reaction. The attraction between Diana and Bradley was obvious, sparking with the kind of barely restrained energy that preceded inevitable disaster. Has Bradley told you about his new promotion? Diana asked Victor, her voice bright with forced casualness. Congratulations, Victor said. Regional sales manager for the entire Southeast, Bradley said with obvious pride. Big raise, company car, travel opportunities. Travel, Victor repeated. That must be exciting for someone looking to expand their horizons. Diana's face flushed slightly. Bradley's always been ambitious. Ambition is important, Victor agreed. So is knowing when to pursue an opportunity and when to recognize that some things aren't available. The tension between the three of them was becoming palpable. Bradley was clearly picking up on undercurrents he didn't fully understand, while Diana was struggling to maintain her composure under Victor's steady gaze. I should go check on Troy, Bradley said, recognizing the need to retreat. Victor, good meeting you. Diana. He paused, seeming to search for the right words. You look incredible. As Bradley walked away, Diana turned to Victor with a mixture of annoyance and anxiety. What was that about? What about? The way you were talking to him. You were being weird. Victor smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. I was being myself. Before Diana could respond, the wedding coordinator appeared, ushering guests toward their seats. The ceremony was about to begin, and Victor allowed himself to be led to the front row, settling in beside Diana as the cathedral filled with the sound of conversation and anticipation. As the processional music began and the wedding party made their entrance, Victor's phone vibrated with another message. This one contained a single image. Bradley Turner entering what appeared to be a hotel room, Diana visible in the background. Victor deleted the message without reaction and turned his attention to the altar as Rebecca appeared in the doorway, radiant in her wedding dress. She looked genuinely happy, genuinely in love, genuinely hopeful about her future. It was a shame that her family was about to destroy all of that. As the priest began the ceremony, Victor found himself thinking about loyalty and betrayal, about the prices people paid for their choices, and about the particular satisfaction that came from watching carefully laid plans come to fruition. Diana reached over and took his hand, probably thinking it was a romantic gesture. Victor squeezed back, but his mind was elsewhere, calculating timelines and contingencies. The ceremony was beautiful. The bride was radiant. The groom was nervous but happy. And in approximately 30 minutes, Diana Kane was going to make the biggest mistake of her life. Chapter 3. The Altar of Truth. The ceremony unfolded with picture-perfect precision. Rebecca glowed as she walked down the aisle, her father Robert struggling to maintain his composure as he gave away his younger daughter. Troy stood at the altar looking like a man who couldn't believe his luck, his eyes never leaving his bride's face. Victor watched the proceedings with the practiced patience of someone who had spent years waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Diana sat beside him, dabbing at her eyes with a tissue, caught up in the romance and emotion of the moment. She had always been sentimental about weddings, Victor reflected. It was one of the things that had initially attracted him to her, the way she believed in fairy tales, even as an adult. The priest began his familiar litany about love, commitment, and the sacred bonds of marriage. Victor found the irony almost unbearable. Here they sat, surrounded by talk of eternal devotion and fidelity, while Diana had been conducting an affair with Bradley Turner for the past 6 weeks. Yes, Victor knew exactly how long it had been going on. He knew about the afternoon meetings at the Marriott downtown. He knew about the late-night phone calls Diana thought he was too sedated to hear. He knew about the plans they were making for after Victor's cancer took a turn for the worse. What Diana didn't know was that Victor had been cancer-free for 3 months. The treatments he continued to attend were maintenance sessions designed to prevent recurrence. He had let her believe his condition was more serious than it was, watching to see how she would respond to the prospect of being a young widow with a substantial life insurance payout. The answer had been predictably disappointing. Do you, Rebecca Michelle Mitchell, take Troy Harrison to be your lawfully wedded husband? The priest intoned. I do, Rebecca said, her voice clear and strong. Victor's phone buzzed. Another message, package ready for delivery. He typed back quickly, wait for my signal. As the priest continued the ceremony, Victor felt Diana tense beside him. She was checking her phone under the guise of adjusting her purse, clearly reading a message that had upset her. Probably from Bradley, who was standing with the groomsmen and shooting nervous glances in their direction. Do you, Troy Michael Harrison, take Rebecca Michelle Mitchell to be your lawfully wedded wife? I do, Troy said, his voice thick with emotion. The priest smiled. By the power vested in me by the state of... Stop the ceremony. Diana's voice cut through the cathedral like a blade, shocking the assembled guests into stunned silence. She stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the marble floor with a sound that echoed through the sudden quiet. Rebecca turned toward her sister, confusion and hurt flooding her face. Diana, what are you doing? Diana's face was flushed, her carefully applied makeup smudged from the tears she had shed during the ceremony. But these weren't tears of joy anymore. These were tears of desperation and panic. I'm sorry, Rebecca, but I can't let this happen, Diana said, her voice shaking. Not when my husband is dying and refuses to help his own family. Victor rose slowly, his movements deliberate and controlled. Diana, perhaps we should discuss this privately. No. Diana whirled to face him, her eyes blazing with a mixture of fury and desperation. I'm tired of your selfishness, Victor. My sister deserves her dream honeymoon, and you have the money sitting in the bank while you waste it on cancer treatments that aren't even working. A gasp went through the assembled guests. Rebecca's face had gone white, while Troy looked like he wanted to disappear into the floor. The priest stood frozen at the altar, clearly uncertain how to handle this unprecedented disruption. Diana, Victor said quietly, you're making a scene. Good. Maybe it's time everyone knew what kind of man you really are. Diana reached into her purse and pulled out her phone, holding it up like a weapon. I have the bank statements right here. We have over $200,000 in savings, and he won't spend $75,000 to help my sister. That money is for my medical expenses, Victor said calmly. Your medical expenses? Diana laughed, but there was no humor in it. You're going to die anyway. What's the point of hoarding money you'll never get to spend? The cathedral erupted in shocked murmurs. Linda Mitchell was sobbing audibly, while Robert had turned an alarming shade of red. Bradley Turner looked like he was witnessing a car accident in slow motion. Diana, stop, Rebecca pleaded, still in her wedding dress, but no longer glowing with happiness. Please don't do this. Not today. I'm doing this for you. Diana shot back. Someone has to stand up to him. Someone has to make him do the right thing. Victor felt a familiar calm descend over him, the same feeling he used to get before a mission in his previous life. This was the moment he had been preparing for, the culmination of months of careful observation and planning. You want me to cancel my cancer treatment, he said, his voice carrying clearly through the cathedral. You want me to give up the medical care that's keeping me alive so that your sister can have an expensive vacation. It's not just a vacation. It's her honeymoon. It's important. More important than my life. Diana hesitated, perhaps finally hearing how her words sounded when spoken aloud. But she was too far committed to back down now. Yes, she said quietly. Yes, it is. The silence that followed was deafening. Victor could see the horror on the faces of the wedding guests, the way they were looking at Diana, as if seeing her for the first time. Even Bradley Turner was staring at her with something approaching disgust. I see, Victor said. And if I refuse? Diana's hand moved to the reception table beside her, closing around the stem of a crystal wine glass that had been set out for the post-ceremony toast. Then you're not the man I thought I married. I'm exactly the man you married, Victor replied. You just never bothered to find out who that was. You're a coward and a selfish. Diana drew back her arm and hurled the wine glass directly at Victor's face. The crystal caught the light from the stained glass windows as it spun through the air, but Victor didn't flinch. He had been expecting this, had been counting on it, in fact. The glass shattered against his forehead with a sharp crack, sending fragments cascading to the marble floor. Blood began to flow from the cuts, and Victor allowed himself to stumble backward, letting out a cry of pain that echoed through the cathedral. My God, someone screamed. Call an ambulance. Diana stood frozen, seeming to realize for the first time what she had done. Her hand was still raised from throwing the glass, and her face had gone pale with shock. Diana. Rebecca rushed toward her sister, her wedding dress rustling. What have you done? Victor pressed his hand to his forehead, feeling the warm blood seep between his fingers. The cuts weren't serious. He had positioned himself to take the impact on the least vulnerable part of his skull, but they were bleeding enough to look dramatic. I'm fine, he said, his voice strained but controlled. I'm fine. But even as he spoke, the cathedral doors burst open and a figure strode in with the kind of confidence that commanded attention. The man was tall and lean, with silver hair and a face that belonged in boardrooms and government offices. He wore an expensive suit and carried himself like someone accustomed to power. Victor smiled through the blood. Right on schedule. What the hell is going on here? The newcomer demanded, his voice carrying the authority of someone who was used to being obeyed. Troy stepped forward, still in shock from the disruption of his wedding. Sir, I don't know who you are, but this is a private ceremony. My name is Admiral James Morrison, retired, the man said, his gaze sweeping over the assembled guests before settling on Victor. And I'm here because Victor Kozlov missed his scheduled check-in. Diana's face went slack. Victor who? Admiral Morrison smiled, but it was a cold expression. Your husband, Mrs. Kozlov. Though I believe he's been going by Victor Kane for the past few years. The cathedral fell into absolute silence. Victor could see the confusion spreading across the faces of the guests, the way they were looking back and forth between him and the Admiral, trying to process what they were hearing. I don't understand, Diana whispered. His name is Victor Kane. We've been married for 3 years. You've been married to an identity, Admiral Morrison replied. Victor Kane is a cover story. Victor Kozlov is a decorated veteran and one of the most effective operatives this country has ever produced. Diana staggered backward, her face draining of all color. That's impossible. He's just a consultant. He has cancer. He's dying. Admiral Morrison looked at Victor with something approaching amusement. Victor, do you want to tell her? Or should I? Victor straightened, the bleeding from his forehead already beginning to slow. When he spoke, his voice carried a different quality, harder, more dangerous, nothing like the mild-mannered consultant Diana thought she knew. The cancer treatment ended 3 months ago, he said quietly. I've been in remission since then. Diana's legs gave out, and she collapsed onto the marble floor beside the altar, her blue dress pooling around her like spilled water. The shock was too much, the revelations coming too fast for her to process. Diana. Rebecca rushed to her sister's side, but Diana was unconscious, her face pale and her breathing shallow. Victor looked down at his wife's unconscious form and felt nothing but cold satisfaction. The first phase of his plan was complete. Diana had revealed her true nature in front of dozens of witnesses, had assaulted him with deadly force, and had learned that the man she had been betraying was far more dangerous than she had ever imagined. But this was just the beginning. Chapter 4. The True Victor. Admiral Morrison knelt beside Diana's unconscious form with the practiced efficiency of someone who had dealt with shock victims before. "She'll be fine," he announced after checking her pulse and breathing, just overwhelmed by the revelations. Rebecca hovered anxiously nearby, her wedding dress now stained with tears and confusion. "I don't understand what's happening. Who is this man? Who are you?" Victor, or Victor, as he was apparently really called, dabbed at the blood on his forehead with a handkerchief, his demeanor completely transformed. Gone was the mild-mannered consultant who had sat through months of cancer treatments. In his place stood someone who radiated controlled danger. "Victor Kozlov," Admiral Morrison said, addressing the assembled guests who remained frozen in their seats, served with distinction in Army Special Operations for 15 years. He specialized in deep cover operations, elimination of high-value targets, and intelligence gathering in hostile territories. Elimination? Troy's voice cracked slightly on the word. Admiral Morrison smiled grimly. "Victor has been responsible for the permanent removal of over 30 individuals who posed threats to national security. He speaks 7 languages fluently, holds black belts in 3 different martial arts, and has successfully infiltrated organizations ranging from arms dealers to terrorist cells." Victor straightened his tie, the gesture somehow more menacing than reassuring. "The consultant identity was a retirement experiment," he explained, his voice carrying a subtle accent that hadn't been there before. "I wanted to see what normal life felt like." "And?" Admiral Morrison asked. "Disappointing." Diana stirred on the marble floor, consciousness returning slowly. When her eyes focused on Victor's face, she let out a small whimper of fear. "You lied to me," she whispered. "Everything was a lie." "Not everything," Victor replied. "I really did have cancer. I really am in remission. And I really am married to you, though I'm beginning to question the wisdom of that decision." Diana struggled to sit up, her face pale and streaked with tears. "The bank accounts, the money. Accumulated over 15 years of very lucrative government contracts," Victor said simply. 200,000 is pocket change, Diana. I have access to resources you can't even imagine." Admiral Morrison was studying the scene with obvious interest. "Victor, when you missed your check-in, we became concerned. Your handler reported some unusual activity around your position." "Nothing I couldn't handle," Victor said, glancing meaningfully at the blood on his forehead. "Though I admit the situation has become more complex than anticipated." Bradley Turner, who had been standing frozen among the groomsmen throughout the entire confrontation, finally found his voice. "Diana, what's he talking about? What unusual activity?" Victor turned his attention to Bradley for the first time since Admiral Morrison's arrival, and the pharmaceutical salesman visibly shrank under his gaze. "Ah yes, Bradley," Victor said softly. "Diana's college boyfriend. The one who's been helping her plan my early demise." "That's not. I would never." "Room 412 at the Marriott downtown," Victor continued conversationally. "Tuesday and Thursday afternoons for the past 6 weeks. Always checked in under your name. Always paid for in cash. Very discreet." Diana's face went white. "How do you know that?" "Because surveillance is what I do, Diana. It's what I've always done." Victor walked closer to his wife, his movements predatory. "Did you really think I wouldn't notice the late-night phone calls? The way you started dressing differently? The sudden interest in my life insurance policies? We weren't. It wasn't supposed to be like this." "What was it supposed to be like?" Diana looked around desperately, seeking support from her family or guests, but found only horrified stares. Even Rebecca was backing away from her sister, clearly struggling to process what she was hearing. "I thought you were dying," Diana whispered. "I thought I was going to be alone, and Bradley offered to help me through it. By committing adultery. It wasn't supposed to hurt anyone. You were supposed to be dead." The words hung in the air like an accusation. Victor felt something cold and final settle in his chest, the same feeling he used to get when a target confirmed their guilt and sealed their fate. "I see," he said quietly. "So you were simply being practical." Admiral Morrison cleared his throat. "Victor, we need to discuss your reactivation." "Reactivation?" Rebecca's voice was barely a whisper. "I'm afraid Victor's retirement experiment is over," Admiral Morrison explained. "We have a situation developing in Eastern Europe that requires his particular skill set." Victor nodded slowly. "How long?" "Indefinite. Could be months, could be years. You know how these things go." "I do indeed." Diana struggled to her feet, using the altar rail for support. You can't just leave. We're married. We have a life together. Victor studied his wife's face, noting the desperation there, the sudden realization that her carefully laid plans were crumbling around her. We had a life together, he corrected. Past tense. But the money, the bank accounts, will be frozen pending a federal investigation into your conspiracy to commit insurance fraud, Admiral Morrison said matter-of-factly. I'm afraid adultery with intent to inherit falls under our jurisdiction when it involves active assets. Diana's legs gave out again, but this time she caught herself against the altar. This isn't happening. This can't be happening. Bradley stepped forward, his face pale but determined. Diana, we'll figure this out. We'll hire a lawyer. We'll. He stopped mid-sentence as Victor turned to look at him. For the first time, the pharmaceutical salesman was seeing Victor Kozlov instead of Victor Kane, and the difference was terrifying. Bradley, Victor said softly, I would recommend that you remain very, very quiet for the next few minutes. You can't threaten me. This is America. You can't just. Victor moved faster than anyone in the cathedral thought possible. One moment he was standing 5 feet away from Bradley. The next, he had the younger man pressed against a marble pillar with his forearm across his throat. I have killed men for much less than what you've done, Victor whispered, his voice so quiet that only Bradley could hear. The only reason you're still breathing is that I haven't decided whether you're worth the paperwork. Bradley's eyes bulged as he struggled for air. Several wedding guests were now openly sobbing, while others had begun to back toward the exits. Victor, Admiral Morrison said calmly. We need him coherent for questioning. Victor released Bradley, who collapsed to the floor gasping. Of course, professional courtesy. Diana was staring at her husband as if seeing him for the first time, which in many ways she was. What are you going to do to us? That depends, Victor replied, adjusting his cufflinks with casual precision. Are you going to cooperate with the federal investigation? What federal investigation? Admiral Morrison smiled. The one that begins the moment Victor's cover identity was compromised by your assault. When you threw that glass, Mrs. Kozlov, you committed assault against a federal asset engaged in a classified operation. But he said he was retired. Retirement doesn't end security clearances, Admiral Morrison explained patiently. Victor's identity was classified for national security reasons. Your public exposure of his real name has potentially compromised ongoing operations and endangered other assets in the field. Victor watched his wife's face as the implications sank in. She was beginning to understand that this wasn't just about a marriage gone wrong or even about adultery. She had stumbled into a world where the rules were very different, and the consequences were far more severe than anything she had imagined. I want a lawyer, Diana said finally. You'll get one, Admiral Morrison assured her, after you've been processed through federal custody. Federal custody? Treason charges are handled at the federal level, Victor explained conversationally. Though I suppose it could be argued down to espionage if you cooperate fully. Diana sank to her knees on the marble floor, the weight of her situation finally becoming clear. Around her, the wreckage of her sister's wedding served as a backdrop to the complete destruction of her life. Rebecca, still in her wedding dress, was crying softly. Diana, how could you do this? How could you ruin everything? But Diana was staring at Victor, seeing him clearly for the first time. You planned this, she whispered. All of it. You knew what I was doing, and you let it happen. Victor straightened his tie again, the gesture now clearly a habit from his operational days. I gave you every opportunity to choose differently. You manipulated me. I observed you. You made your own choices. Admiral Morrison checked his watch. Victor, we need to wrap this up. Transport will be here in 15 minutes. Victor nodded, then turned to address the assembled wedding guests who were still too shocked to move. Ladies and gentlemen, I apologize for disrupting what should have been a joyous occasion. The situation is now under federal jurisdiction, and I trust you'll understand the need for discretion. It wasn't really a request. Rebecca, Victor said, turning to his sister-in-law. I'm sorry your wedding was ruined. It wasn't your fault. Will we see you again? Rebecca asked through her tears. Victor glanced at Diana, who was still kneeling on the floor in her blue dress, broken and defeated. No, he said quietly. I don't think you will. Chapter 5, The Investigation. 3 days after the wedding disaster, Victor sat in a federal interrogation room that he knew better than the investigators realized. He had been on the other side of the one-way mirror many times in his operational career, watching targets squirm under questioning. Now he was the one being debriefed, though the circumstances were admittedly unusual. Special Agent Sarah Chun sat across from him, her file thick with documentation that had been hastily compiled after Diana's public revelation of his identity. Chun was good. Victor could tell by the way she organized her materials and the pointed questions she asked. She reminded him of the intelligence analysts he used to work with, sharp and methodical. "Let's go over the timeline again," Chun said, consulting her notes. "You've been operating under the Victor Kane identity for 3 years." "Correct. And during that time, you've maintained all necessary security protocols." "Until Saturday, yes." Chun looked up from her file. "Walk me through your decision-making process regarding your wife's activities." Victor leaned back in his chair, noting the cameras in the corners and the quality of the recording equipment. Standard federal setup, though he suspected Admiral Morrison was monitoring from another location. "Diana began exhibiting suspicious behavior approximately 8 weeks ago," he said. "Extended absences, protective behavior regarding her phone, changes in spending patterns and social activities. And you decided to observe rather than intervene. I wanted to determine the extent of the security breach. Was this a professional decision or a personal one?" Victor considered the question. It was more complex than it appeared on the surface, requiring him to distinguish between Victor Kozlov's operational instincts and Victor Kane's emotional responses. "Both," he said finally. "Professionally, I needed to assess whether Diana had been compromised by hostile actors. Personally, I wanted to know who I had married." She made a note. "Did you find evidence of foreign intelligence involvement?" "No. Diana's motivation was purely financial." "And Bradley Turner?" "A useful idiot. He provided emotional validation for Diana's plan, but wasn't involved in the strategic thinking." Through the one-way mirror, Victor could see Diana in another interrogation room. She had been crying for hours, her makeup long since washed away by tears and exhaustion. Bradley sat beside her, still in shock at how quickly his life had unraveled. "Let's talk about the $75,000, Chin said. "Were you planning to provide the funds for the honeymoon?" "Never. But you led Diana to believe you might." "I told her I would consider it." "Which I did." Chin smiled slightly. "And your conclusion?" "That anyone who would ask a cancer patient to fund their sister's luxury vacation while demanding he skip medical treatments has revealed their character completely." "So this was a test." "Everything is a test, Agent Chun. Marriage, friendship, loyalty, they're all ongoing evaluations of character under pressure." Chin flipped through several pages of her file. "Your wife claims you deliberately concealed your medical prognosis to entrap her. My wife committed adultery and planned to benefit from my death. The timing of my recovery is irrelevant to those facts. But you admit you didn't correct her misunderstanding about your condition." Victor leaned forward slightly. "Agent Chun, if I told you that a bridge was structurally unsound and you chose to drive across it anyway, would my warning change the fact that you made a poor decision?" "That's not analogous." "It's exactly analogous. Diana chose to believe what she wanted to believe because it served her purposes. I gave her multiple opportunities to ask questions, to show concern for my actual welfare, to behave like a loyal spouse. She failed every test." Chin was quiet for a moment, studying Victor's face. "You sound like you never loved her." "I loved who I thought she was." "And when you realized you were wrong?" Victor's expression didn't change. "Love requires respect, Agent Chun. Respect requires honesty." Diana forfeited both. On the other side of the mirror, Diana was being questioned by Agent Rodriguez, a heavy-set man with the patience of someone who had interrogated terrorists and drug dealers. Diana's story kept changing as she tried to minimize her culpability, but the evidence was overwhelming. Hotel records, phone logs, financial documents, even security camera footage from the Marriott. Admiral Morrison's people had been thorough in documenting Diana's affair and her increasingly desperate conversations with Bradley about Victor's life insurance policies. "Mrs. Kozlov," Rodriguez was saying, "we have recordings of 17 phone conversations between you and Mr. Turner in which you discussed your husband's death as a financial opportunity." "Those were taken out of context," Diana insisted. "I was grieving. I wasn't thinking clearly." "You were grieving for someone who wasn't dead. I thought he was dying. And that justified committing adultery." Diana's lawyer, A public defender who clearly felt overwhelmed by the federal nature of the case tried to intervene. My client was under extreme emotional distress. Your client was planning insurance fraud, Rodriguez interrupted. She was conducting an extramarital affair while her husband underwent cancer treatment. She assaulted a federal asset in a public setting, compromising national security. Emotional distress doesn't excuse treason. In Victor's interrogation room, Agent Chun was wrapping up her questions. One final question, Mr. Kozlov. Are you planning to return to active duty? That's above your clearance level, Agent Chun. She smiled. Fair enough. Any message for your wife? Victor thought for a moment. Through the mirror, he could see Diana hunched over the metal table, her blue wedding dress wrinkled and stained. She looked small and broken, nothing like the confident woman who had thrown a wine glass at his face 3 days ago. Tell her that loyalty is a choice, he said finally. She made hers. The interrogation concluded. Victor was escorted to a different wing of the federal building where Admiral Morrison waited in a secure conference room. The Admiral had changed from his wedding suit into military dress uniform, a reminder that despite his retirement, some habits never died. How do you feel? Morrison asked as Victor took a seat across from him. Operational. Morrison nodded approvingly. Good. Because we have a situation that requires immediate attention. A projection screen descended from the ceiling, displaying a map of Eastern Europe marked with red indicators. Victor recognized the geography immediately. It was an area he had operated in extensively during his active years. Our assets in the region have gone dark, Morrison explained. 3 separate cells, all compromised within the last month. Someone is systematically eliminating our network. Inside job. We believe so. Someone with high-level access and detailed knowledge of our operational structure. Victor studied the map, his mind automatically calculating travel routes, safe houses, and extraction points. It felt good to think operationally again, to focus on clear objectives rather than the messy complications of civilian life. Timeline. You leave tonight. New identity documents are being prepared, though I'm afraid Victor Kozlov is burned for cover work now. Understood. What about Diana? Morrison's expression hardened slightly. Mrs. Kozlov will be processed through the federal system. Charges will likely include conspiracy to commit fraud, adultery under military law, assault against a federal officer, and potential treason depending on how cooperative she becomes. Sentence: 5 to 10 years if she pleads guilty, 20 to life if she fights it and loses. Victor felt nothing at the pronouncement. Diana had made her choices. Now she would face the consequences. It was cleaner than most operational conclusions he had experienced. And Bradley Turner? Accessory charges. He'll probably serve 2 to 3 years. The wedding guests. Sworn to secrecy under national security provisions. They understand the consequences of discussing classified information. Victor nodded. It was thorough, professional, exactly what he would have expected from Morrison's operation. Every loose and tied up, every potential security breach contained. Any questions? Morrison asked. 1. Was any of this coincidence? Morrison smiled, and for the first time since the wedding, Victor saw genuine amusement in the Admiral's eyes. Victor, you've been under discreet surveillance since you entered retirement. We knew about Diana's affair before you did. We've been waiting for you to request reactivation. And if I hadn't, then we would have found another way to bring you back. But your wife's betrayal provided the perfect opportunity. Victor thought about this for a moment, processing the implications. He had been manipulated just as surely as Diana had, though with considerably more skill and for far more sophisticated reasons. I see. Are you angry? Victor considered the question seriously. Was he angry? At Morrison for the manipulation? At Diana for the betrayal? At himself for allowing civilian emotions to cloud his operational judgment? No, he said finally. I'm relieved. Morrison stood, signaling the end of their meeting. Transport leaves at 2,100 hours. Your gear and documentation will be waiting at the aircraft. Understood. As Victor rose to leave, Morrison called after him. Victor. Yes, sir. Welcome back. Victor smiled, and for the first time in 3 years, it felt completely genuine. Thank you, sir. It's good to be home. Chapter 6. The Hunter Returns. The Gulfstream jet cut through the night sky at 35,000 feet, carrying Victor toward a world he had never really left. The passenger cabin was configured for operational use, secure communications, encrypted laptops, and a weapons locker that would have impressed arms dealers in 3 different countries. Viktor Kozlov, the name felt natural again, sat reviewing intelligence files on the compromised network. 7 operatives dead, 3 missing, and a web of betrayal that stretched from Prague to Bucharest. Someone with intimate knowledge of their procedures was systematically dismantling 15 years of carefully built assets. His new identity documents lay beside him. Markus Volkov, arms dealer and information broker with connections throughout Eastern Europe. The legend was solid, backed by years of financial records and social interactions that would withstand close scrutiny. Not that Viktor expected to need it for long. He thought briefly about Diana, probably spending her first night in federal custody. The image should have evoked some emotion, pity, regret, even anger, but Viktor felt nothing except professional satisfaction at a problem resolved. Diana Kane had been Viktor Kane's wife. Viktor Kozlov had never been married. The secure phone beside him buzzed with an encrypted message, package delivered. Target acquired. Viktor smiled and deleted the message. Even in federal custody, Diana was still useful for gathering intelligence about the people in her life. Her phone records, financial transactions, and social connections would be thoroughly analyzed. If any of her contacts had intelligence value, they would be identified and assessed. The plane began its descent toward a private airfield outside Vienna. From there, Viktor would make his way to Prague through a network of safe houses and cutouts that had been maintained during his retirement. The hunt was beginning, and he felt the familiar thrill of operational focus. His handler for this mission was someone he had worked with before, Catherine "Kat" Kozlova, no relation, despite the similar surname. Kat was FSB trained but had defected to American intelligence 10 years ago, bringing with her a network of contacts that made her invaluable for Eastern European operations. Viktor found her waiting in the VIP lounge of the Vienna airport, looking like a successful businesswoman in her tailored suit and expensive accessories. She was beautiful in the way that intelligence operatives often were, carefully maintained, professionally enhanced, and utterly dangerous. "Marcus," she said, using his cover name and kissing his cheek in the European fashion. "You look well." Retirement agreed with me. Until it didn't. They walked through the airport like old friends meeting after a business trip, making casual conversation while maintaining operational awareness. Kat's security team was invisible but present. Viktor spotted at least 3 of them before they reached the parking garage. "Briefing?" Viktor asked as they settled into the back of an armored Mercedes. "En route. The situation has deteriorated since your departure from Washington." Kat handed him a tablet containing updated intelligence files. The pictures were grim. Operational photos of crime scenes, surveillance footage of compromised safe houses, intercepted communications that revealed an enemy who knew their procedures intimately. "Working theory?" Viktor asked, scrolling through the data. "Double agent with high-level access. Someone who's been embedded for years, feeding information to the Russians while building trust and credibility." Candidates. 3 possibilities. 2 are already dead, killed in the past month under circumstances that suggest they discovered something. Viktor studied the files of the dead operatives. Both had been veteran intelligence officers with impeccable records and years of successful operations. If they had been eliminated for getting too close to the truth, their killer was someone with both access and operational skills. The 3rd candidate. Kat's expression darkened. Alexander Petrov, deep cover asset, been in place for 8 years. Currently operating as a legitimate businessman in Prague with connections to arms dealers and information brokers. In other words, exactly the kind of person Markus Volkov would naturally associate with. Exactly. Viktor continued reading, noting the details of Petrov's operation. It was sophisticated, layered, exactly the kind of long-term penetration that the Russians excelled at. If Petrov was indeed their target, eliminating him would require careful planning and flawless execution. Rules of engagement? Viktor asked. Flexible. The priority is stopping the leak and protecting remaining assets. How you accomplish that is up to your professional judgment. Viktor nodded. In operational terms, that meant he had authorization to kill anyone who posed a threat to the mission. It was the kind of latitude he had always worked best with. Local support? Minimal. The network has been compromised, so we're operating with a skeleton crew of verified assets only. weapons, whatever you need. Marcus Volkov has a reputation for having access to the best equipment money can buy. They drove through the Vienna suburbs in comfortable silence, both lost in their own preparations for the operation ahead. Victor felt the familiar mental shift that occurred when he transitioned from civilian life to operational mode. Emotions became secondary to mission objectives. Personal relationships became tactical considerations. Life and death became mathematical probabilities. The safe house was a modernist villa in the hills outside the city, designed to look like the weekend retreat of a successful entrepreneur. In reality, it was a fortress equipped with the latest surveillance and defensive technology. Kat led him to a secure conference room where additional intelligence materials waited. Maps, photographs, financial records, and communication intercepts. Everything needed to build a complete picture of their target and his operation. Petrov runs an import-export business that serves as cover for arms dealing, Kat explained. He has legitimate clients mixed with criminal organizations and intelligence agencies. The perfect position for gathering information about our operations. Victor studied surveillance photos of Alexander Petrov. Mid-40s, unremarkable appearance, the kind of man who could blend into any crowd. Exactly what Victor would expect from a successful deep-cover operative. How do we approach him? Marcus Volkov has a reputation in certain circles. We've arranged for you to have a business meeting with Petrov, a potential arms deal that would require his specialized connections. And if he's not our target, then we'll have wasted a week building a relationship with a legitimate arms dealer. If he is our target, Kat smiled, but there was no warmth in it. Then you'll do what you do best. Victor spent the next 2 hours reviewing every detail of the operation. Travel routes, communication protocols, extraction procedures, and contingency plans for every scenario they could anticipate. It was methodical, professional work that reminded him why he had been so successful in his operational career. As the briefing concluded, Kat handed him a secure phone and a new set of identity documents. Your legend is solid, she said. Marcus Volkov has been building a reputation for 2 years, just in case we needed him. And my civilian identity? Victor Kane is dead, died in a car accident 3 days ago. Diana Kane is a grieving widow facing federal charges related to her late husband's classified work. Victor felt a strange sense of closure at that news. Victor Kane had been an experiment in normal life, and that experiment was officially over. There would be no going back to suburban houses and cancer treatments and the petty betrayals of ordinary people. When do I leave for Prague? Tomorrow morning. Petrov is expecting Marcus Volkov for lunch. Victor nodded and headed for his quarters to prepare for the mission. As he unpacked his operational gear, weapons, surveillance equipment, and tools that had no legitimate civilian use, he thought about the progression of events that had brought him back to this life. Diana's betrayal had been predictable, almost mundane in its selfishness. She had wanted money and comfort and had been willing to commit adultery and fraud to get them. It was the kind of betrayal that happened in suburban bedrooms across America every day. But the betrayal waiting for him in Prague would be different. Professional, calculated, and potentially deadly. Someone had spent years building trust and credibility while systematically destroying American intelligence assets. That was a betrayal worth his full attention. Victor cleaned his Sig Sauer P226 with practiced efficiency, checking the action and loading hollow-point rounds that would expand on impact. Tomorrow he would begin hunting the kind of prey he was designed to eliminate. The suburban consultant who had attended cancer treatments and worried about his wife's shopping habits was gone forever. In his place sat Viktor Kozlov, and Viktor Kozlov had never forgotten how to kill. The hunt was about to begin. Chapter 7. The Prague Gambit. Prague's Old Town Square buzzed with autumn tourists and street musicians, a perfect cover for the kind of meeting that Marcus Volkov would naturally conduct. Victor sat at an outdoor cafe, reading a Czech newspaper while monitoring the approaches to the restaurant where he would meet Alexander Petrov in 30 minutes. 3 days of surveillance had confirmed that Petrov was indeed their target. Victor had observed the arms dealer conducting business with known intelligence operatives, using communication protocols that suggested extensive training, and most damning of all, accessing a safe house that only someone with insider knowledge could have located. The evidence was circumstantial but compelling. More importantly, Victor's operational instincts, honed by 15 years of distinguishing between targets and civilians, identified Petrov as a threat that needed to be eliminated. His secure phone buzzed with a message from Kat, secondary target acquired. Victor smiled and deleted the message. Kat's team had located one of Petrov's handlers, a Russian intelligence officer operating under diplomatic cover. That meant they would have multiple pressure points to exploit during the confrontation. Victor finished his coffee and walked the 6 blocks to Restaurant Campa, an upscale establishment that catered to businessmen and government officials. The kind of place where Marcus Volkov would naturally conduct arms deals with corrupt officials and criminal organizations. Alexander Petrov was already seated at a corner table, positioned to observe all entrances while maintaining clear sight lines to the exits. Professional paranoia that confirmed Victor's assessment of his target. Mr. Volkov. Petrov stood and offered his hand. Alexander Petrov, thank you for agreeing to meet. My pleasure, Victor replied, noting the firmness of Petrov's grip and the way his eyes cataloged details. I understand you have access to specialized inventory. They settled into their seats, and Victor ordered wine while Petrov made small talk about Prague's business climate. To any observer, they looked like legitimate businessmen discussing a potential partnership. I've heard interesting things about your operation, Petrov said finally. You seem to have connections that bypass traditional channels. I provide solutions for clients with unique requirements, Victor replied. Discretion and reliability are my primary commodities. And your clients? Government agencies with off-books requirements. Private security firms operating in hostile territories. Organizations that need capabilities their legitimate suppliers can't provide. Petrov nodded approvingly. I work with similar clientele. Perhaps we can find areas of mutual benefit. They spent an hour discussing arms deals and intelligence contacts, each probing the other's knowledge and connections. Victor was impressed by Petrov's professionalism. The man was clearly a skilled operative who had spent years building his cover identity. There is one complication, Victor said as their lunch arrived. My government contacts have mentioned security concerns in this region. Apparently, several intelligence networks have been compromised. Petrov's expression didn't change, but Victor caught a micro-expression of satisfaction that confirmed his suspicions. Security is always a concern in our business, Petrov replied carefully. I've heard similar reports. Have you? From what sources? Rumors, mainly. The intelligence community is surprisingly chatty when they think their operations are secure. Victor smiled. Speaking of security, I should mention that Marcus Volkov isn't my real name. Petrov set down his fork, his body language shifting almost imperceptibly into a more defensive posture. Oh, my name is Victor Kozlov. I'm a retired American Special Operations Officer, and you, Alexander Petrov, are under arrest for treason against the United States. The restaurant continued its normal operations around them, other diners unaware that they were witnessing the culmination of a months-long intelligence operation. Petrov's hand moved slowly toward his jacket pocket, but Victor's voice stopped him. I wouldn't recommend that. My partner has a sniper rifle trained on your head from the building across the street, and this restaurant is currently surrounded by American intelligence assets. You're bluffing. Victor lifted his wine glass in a casual toast, the gesture serving as a prearranged signal. Through the restaurant window, Petrov could see red laser dots dancing across the glass, confirmation that multiple snipers had him in their sights. Alexander Petrov, Victor continued conversationally. Real name Alexei Volkov. Interesting coincidence with my cover name. FSB trained, embedded in Prague 8 years ago under deep cover. You've been systematically identifying and eliminating American intelligence assets while feeding operational intelligence to your Russian handlers. Petrov's face had gone pale, but his training held. You have no authority to arrest anyone in the Czech Republic. Actually, I do. The Czech intelligence service has been fully briefed on your activities, and they've agreed to extradite you to the United States under existing intelligence sharing agreements. You can't prove anything. Victor reached into his jacket and placed a small recording device on the table between them. Actually, I can. You see, Marcus Volkov's business meetings are always recorded for security purposes, including this one. He pressed play, and Petrov's voice filled the small space between them. The intelligence community is surprisingly chatty when they think their operations are secure. Admitting to intelligence gathering activities while operating under false identity, Victor noted clinically. Combined with the financial records my team has already obtained, that should be sufficient for a treason conviction. Petrov was calculating. Victor could see it in his eyes. Assessing escape routes, measuring distances to exits, probably considering whether he could kill Victor and fight his way out of the restaurant. Don't, Victor said quietly. I've killed men for much less than what you've done. So have I. Then you know how this ends. They stared at each other across the table, two professionals who understood the stakes and the rules of the game they were playing. What do you want? Petrov asked finally. Information. Your handlers, your communication protocols, your methods for identifying American assets. Complete cooperation in exchange for life in prison rather than execution. And if I refuse? Victor's smile was cold. Then you won't leave this restaurant alive. Petrov weighed his options for another 30 seconds before nodding slowly. I want immunity for my family. Done. And relocation for my contacts who weren't involved in the killings. Reasonable. I'll need guarantees in writing. Victor gestured to the waiter for the check. You'll get them. But first, you're going to make some phone calls. 2 hours later, they sat in a secure facility outside Prague, while Petrov methodically dismantled his entire network. Names, addresses, communication protocols, financial arrangements. Everything needed to roll up the Russian operation and protect remaining American assets. Kat monitored the interrogation from an adjacent room, occasionally sending Victor notes with follow-up questions. The intelligence hall was enormous, representing years of Russian intelligence work that would now be turned against them. One question, Victor said as the debriefing concluded. Was any of this personal? Petrov looked puzzled. Personal? The American operatives you killed. Did you know any of them personally? Of course. That's how intelligence work functions. You build relationships, gain trust, exploit vulnerabilities. Victor nodded. I see. Why do you ask? Because I've killed men I've never met for national security reasons, Victor replied. But I've never killed someone who trusted me. It's just business, Mr. Kozlov. Nothing personal. Victor stood, indicating that the interrogation was over. Everything is personal, Alexei. That's what you never understood. As Czech intelligence officers led Petrov away to begin the extradition process, Kat joined Victor in the observation room. Clean operation, she said approvingly. No casualties, complete intelligence recovery, network neutralized. Professional work, Victor agreed. Are you ready to come back permanently? Victor considered the question. 3 weeks ago, he had been Victor Kane, suburban consultant and cancer patient. Now he was Victor Kozlov again, and the transition felt natural, necessary. Yes, he said finally. I think I am. Kat smiled. Good. Because we have another situation developing in Southeast Asia that requires your particular skills. Victor felt the familiar anticipation of a new mission, a new challenge, a new opportunity to do what he did best. Diana's betrayal had freed him from the illusion of normal life, and Petrov's capture had reminded him why he was born to do this work. When do we leave? Tomorrow. But first, there's something you should know about your wife. Victor raised an eyebrow. Diana? She's been cooperating with federal investigators, providing information about everyone she knows, family, friends, business contacts, looking for a plea bargain. And she wants to see you. Claims she has information that could be valuable to national security. Victor thought about this for a moment. Diana, in federal custody, desperate and broken, trying to trade information for reduced sentences. It was pathetic and predictable, exactly what he would have expected from someone who had never understood the concept of loyalty. Schedule the meeting, he said finally. You're sure? She chose her path. Now she can face the consequences. Kat nodded and made a note in her file. One more thing. Bradley Turner has been released pending trial. Apparently, his cooperation was considered sufficient to justify bail. Victor smiled, but it wasn't a pleasant expression. Has it? That's not my department, Kat replied diplomatically. But Victor was already thinking about Bradley Turner, walking free while Diana sat in federal custody. Thinking about the pharmaceutical salesman who had helped his wife plan for his death, who had provided emotional support for her betrayal, who had probably convinced himself that none of it was really his fault. Bradley Turner had been Diana's accomplice, but he had never been Victor's target. That was about to change. I'll need 48 hours to handle some personal business before we leave for Southeast Asia, Victor said. Kat studied his face, reading the implications in his expression. Understood. Just remember that Bradley Turner is now a protected witness. I understand completely. Chapter 8. The Reckoning. Bradley Turner lived in a modest townhouse in a suburb that catered to young professionals who couldn't quite afford the neighborhoods they aspired to. Victor observed the pharmaceutical salesman's routine for 24 hours before making his approach, noting the man's predictable patterns and obvious security vulnerabilities. Bradley left for work at 7:30 each morning, returned by 6 p.m., and spent his evenings drinking beer while watching television or scrolling through his phone. He ordered takeout 3 nights a week, went to the gym sporadically, and seemed to be avoiding his usual social activities since Diana's arrest. On Thursday evening, Victor waited in Bradley's living room when the younger man returned from work. He had disabled the alarm system and entered through the back door, skills that came as naturally as breathing after 15 years of operational work. "Hello, Bradley," Victor said quietly when the pharmaceutical salesman walked through his front door. Bradley dropped his briefcase and stumbled backward, his face going white with terror. "What are you doing here? How did you get in?" "I wanted to have a conversation about loyalty. I didn't do anything wrong. I cooperated with the FBI. I told them everything." Victor remained seated in Bradley's leather recliner, his posture relaxed but ready. "Did you? Tell me about your relationship with my wife." Bradley's hands were shaking as he slowly closed the front door behind him. "Diana told you she was getting divorced. She said you were dying and that you had become abusive. And you believed her. She had bruises. I saw them myself." Victor nodded thoughtfully. Diana always bruised easily, usually from running into furniture when she'd been drinking. But you chose to interpret those bruises as evidence of abuse rather than clumsiness. She was scared of you. Was she? Or was she scared of being caught? Bradley edged toward the kitchen, probably hoping to reach a phone or a knife. Victor allowed the movement, curious to see what the man would do when cornered. "Look, I know you're angry," Bradley said. "But Diana and I never meant for anyone to get hurt." "No? Then what did you mean?" "We thought you were dying. Diana said the doctors gave you 6 months at most. We were just providing emotional support for each other." Victor smiled coldly. "By committing adultery and planning to benefit from my death." "It wasn't like that." "Then what was it like, Bradley?" Bradley reached the kitchen and fumbled for the phone on the counter. Victor made no move to stop him. "Call the police if you want," Victor said conversationally. "Tell them that Viktor Kozlov, federal intelligence asset, is in your home discussing your conspiracy to commit insurance fraud." Bradley's hand froze on the phone. "You can't threaten me. I'm a protected witness. Protected from prosecution, not from conversation. This is harassment." Victor stood slowly, his movement causing Bradley to press himself against the kitchen counter. "Bradley, do you know what I did for a living before I became Victor Kane? Diana said you were a consultant. I eliminated threats to national security. People who betrayed their country, their colleagues, their sacred oaths. I was very good at it." Bradley's breathing was becoming rapid and shallow, the first signs of panic setting in. "I never betrayed anyone. You betrayed me. I didn't even know you." Victor walked slowly toward the kitchen, his movements predatory. "You knew I was Diana's husband. You knew I was fighting cancer. You knew she was married and committed to someone else. But you chose to pursue a relationship anyway. She came to me. I didn't pursue anything. And when she came to you, you chose to help her rather than encourage her to work on her marriage." Bradley was backing toward the sliding glass door that led to his small patio. "What was I supposed to do? Turn away someone who needed help? You were supposed to tell her to get counseling. You were supposed to suggest marriage therapy. You were supposed to act like a decent human being instead of a predator taking advantage of a woman in crisis." "I'm not a predator." Victor continued his slow advance. "No? Then what do you call a man who pursues a married woman by telling her what she wants to hear?" "I cared about her. You cared about the opportunity she represented." They had reached the sliding door, and Bradley was fumbling with the lock. His hands were shaking too badly to operate the mechanism effectively. "What do you want from me?" Bradley asked desperately. "I want you to understand the consequences of betrayal. I already lost my job. My reputation is ruined. Everyone knows what happened." Victor stopped his advance, standing close enough that Bradley could smell his cologne. "Those are social consequences, Bradley. I'm talking about personal consequences. I don't understand. You helped my wife plan for my death. You provided emotional support for her betrayal. You made it easier for her to justify her actions. She would have done it anyway. Perhaps. But you made it possible for her to feel righteous about it. Victor reached into his jacket, and Bradley flinched violently. But instead of a weapon, Victor produced a small recording device. I've been recording our conversation, Victor said simply. Every word you've spoken has been captured and transmitted to federal investigators. Bradley's face went slack. That's entrapment. Actually, it's evidence gathering. You see, Bradley, your plea agreement requires complete honesty about your relationship with Diana and your knowledge of her plans. Victor pressed play, and Bradley's voice filled the kitchen. Diana told you she was getting divorced. She said you were dying and that you had become abusive. But Diana never told me she was getting divorced. Victor continued conversationally. In fact, she told investigators that she never mentioned divorce to you. She said you both understood that your relationship was temporary, lasting only until my death. Bradley's legs gave out, and he slid down the glass door until he was sitting on the floor. She lied to me. She lied to everyone, Bradley. But you chose to believe her lies because they gave you what you wanted. Victor knelt down so they were at eye level. Your plea agreement is void. You'll be recharged with conspiracy to commit fraud, and this time there won't be any cooperation credit. You can't do this. I already have. Victor stood and adjusted his jacket. The FBI will be here within the hour to place you under arrest. I suggest you use that time to call a lawyer. As Victor walked toward the front door, Bradley called after him desperately. What about Diana? What's going to happen to her? Victor paused with his hand on the doorknob. Diana chose her path when she threw that wine glass. Now she'll walk it to the end. But you loved her once. Victor turned back to look at the broken man sitting on his kitchen floor. I loved who I thought she was. But that person never existed. So this is it. You just destroy our lives and walk away. Bradley, Victor said quietly, you destroyed your own lives the moment you chose betrayal over loyalty. I'm simply ensuring that the consequences match the crime. He left Bradley sitting on the floor and drove to the federal detention center where Diana was being held pending trial. The meeting had been arranged through official channels, and Diana's lawyer would be present, but Victor had requested a few minutes alone with his wife first. They met in a small conference room with reinforced glass windows and institutional furniture. Diana looked older than her 31 years, the stress of incarceration aging her face and dulling her auburn hair. She wore an orange jumpsuit that emphasized how far she had fallen from the elegant woman who had attended her sister's wedding. Hello, Diana. She looked up at him with a mixture of hope and fear. Victor? Victor? I don't know what to call you anymore. Victor is fine. I need to ask you something. Diana's voice was barely above a whisper. Is any of it real? Did you ever actually love me? Victor considered the question seriously. I loved Victor Kane's wife. But you were never really married to Victor Kane. That's not an answer. It's the only answer I can give you. Diana began to cry, the tears falling silently down her cheeks. I've lost everything. My family won't speak to me. Rebecca's marriage is ruined. My parents are bankrupt from legal fees. You made choices, Diana. This is the result. But I thought you were dying. I was scared and alone, and Bradley was there for me. You were scared of being poor, Victor corrected. You were alone because you chose to be unfaithful rather than supportive. Diana's crying intensified. I know I made mistakes, but I never meant for anyone to get hurt. You threw a wine glass at my face. I was angry and confused and you assaulted a federal officer. Diana wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. The lawyers say I could get 20 years. You could. Is there anything you can do? Any way you could help me? Victor studied his wife's face, noting the desperation there, the way she was still trying to manipulate him even from federal custody. I could speak to the prosecutors, he said finally. Hope flared in Diana's eyes. Would you? I could tell them about your complete lack of remorse, your continued attempts to justify your actions, your willingness to betray anyone, including your own family, to avoid consequences. The hope died as quickly as it had appeared. You bastard. Diana, you asked Bradley Turner to help you plan for my death while I was undergoing cancer treatment. You committed adultery and assault and treason. You destroyed your sister's wedding and your family's reputation. And even now, sitting in federal custody facing decades in prison, you're trying to manipulate me into helping you escape consequences. Victor stood to leave. There is no redemption for that level of betrayal. Wait. Diana reached across the table toward him. I have information. About Bradley's pharmaceutical contacts, about some of the people we met through his work. There might be intelligence value. I already know about Bradley's contacts. I know about everyone you've ever met, every place you've ever been, every conversation you've ever had since the day we met. Diana's face crumpled. Then why did you come here? Victor paused at the door. To see if there was any part of the woman I thought I married still left in you. And there isn't. He left Diana crying in the conference room and drove to the airport where Kat was waiting with their transportation to Southeast Asia. As the plane lifted off, Victor felt the familiar satisfaction of a mission completed successfully. Diana would serve her sentence. Bradley would likely serve his. Rebecca's marriage might survive, though it would take time to recover from the damage. The Mitchell family would eventually rebuild their lives, scarred but wiser. And Viktor Kozlov would return to the work he was born to do, leaving the failed experiment of normal life behind forever. Chapter 9. The Final Truth. 6 months later, Viktor Kozlov stood on the observation deck of a high-security federal prison in Colorado, watching through reinforced glass as Diana Kane walked through the exercise yard below. She had lost weight. Her auburn hair was shorter and grayer, and she moved with the careful awareness of someone who had learned to navigate a dangerous environment. The mission in Southeast Asia had been successful. 3 enemy agents eliminated, a trafficking network dismantled, and American hostages recovered without casualties. Now Victor was back in the United States for a brief period before his next assignment, and he had decided to conduct one final piece of business. Warden Patricia Hayes joined him at the observation window, her expression professional but curious. She's adapted well to prison life, Hayes said. Better than most white-collar criminals. Has she? Diana Kane is what we call a survivor. She's learned the social dynamics, made the right alliances, stayed out of trouble. Model prisoner. Victor watched his ex-wife interact with other inmates, noting how she had positioned herself within the prison hierarchy. Diana was cleaning tables in the commissary area, a job that provided access to information and small privileges that could be traded for protection. Any visitors? Victor asked. Her sister came once, about 3 months ago. Very brief visit, lots of crying. The parents sent money for her commissary account, but haven't visited. What about Bradley Turner? Warden Hayes consulted her tablet. He's serving his sentence at the federal facility in Pennsylvania. No communication between them since they were both convicted. Victor nodded. Bradley had ultimately received 8 years after his plea agreement was voided, and he was convicted on all charges. The man who had helped Diana plan for Victor's death was now learning his own hard lessons about consequences. She's asked to see you several times, Hayes continued. Monthly requests through her lawyer. I know. Are you planning to meet with her? Victor watched Diana finish her cleaning duties and return to her cell block. She moved efficiently, without wasted motion, adapting to circumstances as she always had. Yes, he said finally. One last time. The meeting took place in the same type of conference room where Victor had last spoken with Diana, but this time the setting was permanent concrete and steel rather than temporary detention. Diana was escorted in wearing standard prison uniforms, her appearance markedly different from the elegant woman who had attended her sister's wedding. Victor, she said quietly, taking the seat across from him. I wasn't sure you'd come. I almost didn't. They sat in silence for several minutes, studying each other across the metal table. Diana looked older, harder, but also more honest than Victor had ever seen her. Prison had stripped away the elaborate self-deception she had maintained during their marriage. I've had a lot of time to think, Diana said finally. About what I did, about who I was, about the choices I made. And I was a terrible person. Selfish, manipulative, willing to hurt anyone who stood between me and what I wanted. Victor waited, saying nothing. I told myself I was a victim, Diana continued. That you had deceived me, that Bradley had misled me, that circumstances had forced me into bad decisions. But that was all lies. Yes, it was. I chose to have an affair. I chose to plan for your death. I chose to assault you at Rebecca's wedding. Nobody made me do any of those things. Victor leaned back in his chair. Why are you telling me this now? Because it's the truth. And because I need you to know that I understand what I did to you. Do you? Diana's eyes filled with tears, but she didn't try to wipe them away. I took a man who was fighting cancer, who trusted me to support him through the worst time of his life, and I betrayed him in every way possible. I planned to benefit from his death while he was still alive and trying to get better. You did. There's no excuse for that. No justification, no explanation that makes it acceptable. I was evil. Victor studied his ex-wife's face, looking for signs of manipulation or self-pity, but found neither. Diana appeared to be telling the truth, a remarkable development for someone who had spent their entire marriage lying. What do you want from me, Diana? Nothing, she said immediately. I'm not asking for forgiveness or help or anything else. I just wanted you to know that I understand what I did to you. And I wanted to thank you for not having me killed. Victor raised an eyebrow. What makes you think I considered it? Because I know who you really are now. Viktor Kozlov, the man who eliminates threats to national security. I betrayed you in the most fundamental way possible, and you could have made me disappear without anyone asking questions. She was right, of course. Victor could have eliminated Diana at any point during her betrayal, and there were people who would have considered it justified. Instead, he had chosen the legal system, a decision that still surprised him. Why do you think I didn't? He asked. Diana considered the question carefully. Because you're not a monster. You're a professional who does what's necessary to protect people, but you don't kill out of personal anger. That's a charitable interpretation. Is it wrong? Victor thought about the question. He had killed many people during his operational career, but always for strategic reasons rather than personal ones. Even Alexander Petrov, who had betrayed American assets for years, had been taken alive because his intelligence value outweighed his crimes. No, he said finally. It's not wrong. Will I ever see you again? No. Diana nodded, as if she had expected that answer. Will you tell me one thing? When you married me, was any of it real for you? Victor considered lying, but decided Diana had earned honesty. For about 6 months, I thought I had found something worth retiring for. A normal life with someone who could love me without knowing what I had done in my previous career. And then I realized that the woman I thought I had married didn't exist. You were always who you are, Diana. I just chose not to see it. Diana was crying openly now, but she made no move to end the conversation. I'm sorry, she whispered. For all of it. For betraying you. For hurting you. For wasting the chance you gave me to be part of something real. Victor stood to leave. I know you are. Victor, Diana called as he reached the door. Do you think people can really change? He turned back to look at her one final time. I think people can learn to be honest about who they've always been. Is that enough? For some people. For you. Victor paused, considering his words carefully. You have 18 years to find out. As Victor left the federal prison, he thought about redemption and consequences, about the choices people made and the prices they paid. Diana would serve her sentence, and maybe she would emerge as a different person. Or maybe she would simply become a more sophisticated version of who she had always been. It didn't matter to Victor either way. Diana Kane was a chapter in Victor Kane's life, and Victor Kane was dead. Viktor Kozlov had work to do, missions to complete, threats to eliminate. The world was full of people who betrayed their countries, their colleagues, their sacred oaths, and someone had to hold them accountable. 6 weeks later, Victor was in Bangkok conducting surveillance on a human trafficking network when his secure phone buzzed with an encrypted message from Admiral Morrison. New priority target. Female asset compromised. High-value intelligence at risk. Victor smiled and deleted the message. There was always another mission, another betrayal to investigate, another threat to neutralize. It was the work he was born to do, and he was very good at it. The failed experiment in normal life was behind him forever. Viktor Kozlov was home. 3,000 miles away, in a federal prison in Colorado, Diana Kane worked in the commissary and thought about the husband she had betrayed. She would serve her 18 years without parole, without visitors, without hope of reconciliation. She had made her choices, and now she lived with the consequences. But sometimes, late at night in her cell, she wondered if the man she had married had ever really existed at all. Or if Viktor Kozlov had been playing a role from the very beginning, conducting his own kind of surveillance on the woman who thought she was deceiving him. The answer to that question would remain with Victor, classified like everything else about the man who had chosen to be Victor Kane for just long enough to learn that some betrayals were unforgivable. And in the end, that was the only truth that mattered. This is where our story comes to an end. Share your thoughts in the comments section. Thanks for your time. If you enjoy this story, please subscribe to this channel. Click on the video you see on the screen, and I will see you there.